And mine. Great, recording in progress. So hello, bonjour, Jalasi, Kwe, bienvenue, welcome everyone to Food for All New Brunswick's Let's Talk About Food and Climate Change Upskilling event. My name is Jill Van Horn. I'm the Network Director at Food for All. And before we begin our event today, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. And so personally, I am broadcasting from the ancestral and unceded lands of the Mi'kmaq. I am located here in Moncton, New Brunswick in the Southeast region, originally called Signiftuk. And so Food for All carries out its work within the province of what we now call New Brunswick, which is the unceded territory of the Wolastoqiyik, the Mi'kmaq, and the Passamaquoddy nations. And so these lands are governed by the peace and friendship treaties, which were established between the Crown and the Wabanaki Confederacy tribes. So these treaties, as many of us likely know, are often neglected. And so our actions and our discussions here, they provide us with opportunities to uphold those treaties and to consider how might we do so in this work that we're doing and in our broader lives. And so as we reflect here, we're talking about food and climate and the land on which we gather, the climate, the environment, and the people is so important to this topic. So I'd encourage us each to take that time to think about the legacies past and present of colonialism, of environmental racism, and the climate crisis itself, as well as ways to take on climate justice and solutions for change. And so thank you for that. And I want to give you a little intro to Food for All New Brunswick if you're not familiar with us. We are a provincial bilingual organization that envisions a New Brunswick that is informed, connected, and engaged in food security for all. So we work to advance food security in the province by supporting champions like you all here today. We do this by sharing information and resources and supporting food actors on the ground and around decision-making tables. And so some of the core offerings that Food for All makes available are the New Brunswick Food Programs Map, which is a wonderful visual of all of the food action taking place across New Brunswick. We also have a resource directory on our website that includes many different categories, funding opportunities, tools, and high quality New Brunswick made content when we can find it, that is bilingual when we can find it, to support food actors in their work. And as well, we administer the Community Food Mentors program. The CFM program, some CFMs are in the room today, it's a capacity building program for individuals that want to build community through food. And we'll come back to the CFM program a little bit later. Food for All also shares a monthly newsletter. And so you can sign up on our website. We pull together different kinds of toolkits. We do different kind of knowledge exchange sessions like this one here today. And we also develop publications like an eater's guide to climate action. And so that is our segue, folks, to getting started. And so during today's upskilling session, the purpose of today is equipping community members and leaders on the topic of food and climate change. The climate crisis, as we know, is the most urgent and existential crisis, the issue that we're sharing here together on this planet. And in New Brunswick, we eat from a global food system. So our food is so deeply connected to climate change, both away and close to home. With nearly a third of global emissions resulting from food systems, we would see food systems as a huge solution for change, as an area where we can take action and that we can make a difference. And yet, food is often left out of the climate conversation. So during the recent COP26 in Glasgow, food systems were discussed, but many critics felt that it didn't get the attention it deserved. And so Food Secure Canada has introduced in 2019 the food policy for Canada, which promises alignment with the UN sustainability goals, like zero hunger, good health and well-being, responsible consumption and production, and climate action. And so we have lots of tools around us here to support using food as a tool for climate action. But as it stands today, Canada is not quite on track to meet any of the SDG targets that were explicitly mentioned in the food policy for Canada. We know too that Indigenous and genuinely sustainable local food initiatives to produce food must be supported instead of many of the destructive and unsustainable agro-industrial food production systems that we eat from today. And so today's session is intended to support this movement and to support action and discussions towards food and climate change by equipping you all here with the tools like an Eater's Guide to Climate Action and a brand new tool. It's almost hot off the press. It's hot off the electronic press and will be hot off the printing press in the next week or two, which is a facilitation booklet. And so first, we would love to get a sense of where people are coming from and where people are arriving to us here today. So we want to try out Mentimeter. We're going to do this for the first time with you together. And so what motivated you to show up today? We're interested in knowing. And so if you click on your Mentimeter link, which is in the chat, and you put in the code that is noted in there below, you'll see there's space to enter a word or three, if you like. You can enter a few words in those spaces and then click submit. Do you all feel this sense of excitement that I feel? I hope so. And so we have, please wait for our presenter to show the next slide. And so Geneviève, I'll cue it over to you for seeing some potential results from our Mentimeter. And so if you haven't entered anything yet, you still have a minute or two to do so. And there is a refresh button. So Geneviève, I see you've unmuted. Oh, you haven't unmuted. Let us know if that is working out for you to see the results.
I'm seeing things on my screen. Are you guys seeing things on yours?
All right, so I have a proposal. Jen, I'd like to ask you to go ahead and share your screen for a moment so that we can see what's coming up.
Let's see here. Bear with me. You guys see it?
Oh, great. So many reasons folks are showing up here today. Networking is a big one. And I think perhaps that means that that's a common word. Autonomie alimentaire, we work requirement. Oh, interesting. I love that one. That means we're getting some traction at folks' workplaces. Connection, weather, lack of resources, concern for the environment, so many reasons. Taking climate action. And I see a word here of urgency that, yes, we're in an urgent moment. And so thank you so much for sharing this here now. We'll do this again. We'll come back again later, folks, to our Mentimeter with some other questions. And so Rosin, I'll get you to go ahead and share your screen again as we come back to our presentation about the tools that we're showing here today. And so an eater's guide to climate action. We won't get you to do Mentimeter this time, but just maybe with a show of your favorite reaction button that indicates a yes or a no. Can folks show us maybe with a hand clap or a thumbs up, who here is familiar with an eater's guide to climate action? Has anyone been through the guide? Oh, we've got some hands up. Carrie Bedford, Adam Birchweaver, great, Leola. Thanks, folks. So we've got some folks that are familiar with it and maybe others that aren't, which is great. So an Eater's Guide to Climate Action was developed in over 2020 and into 2021. It was published on Earth Day in 2021. And the purpose is to help us better understand, help us develop a base of understanding about food and climate. How do they interact? And what is some of this nuance that lives behind all of it? Because there is very many different ways that food systems and climate interact. So it's really an aim to help eaters understand how food systems can contribute to climate change and to the negative impacts, but also how can food and food systems be part of the solutions? This comes with a big caveat. This is a 28-page document that can only cover so much. And so the big caveat with an Eater's Guide to Climate Action is that while it doesn't cover everything, it can't cover all of the aspects of this complex issue. It really aims to provide an introduction and a base level of understanding to really start unpacking this because it's a big topic. And so, Rosin, I'll get you to go to the next slide. And so, as a starting point for understanding the basics, the information that we've presented throughout the guide is linked to lots of different areas of our food systems. And so we have broken down to climate change and food overall. And we try to provide global and local statistics where available around food systems. And so percentage of local food, perhaps, that New Brunswickers are eating, or local vegetables, rather. What is the impact of food waste on food systems? We've broken this down into a number of spreads. They're very beautiful. So Rosin, if you can go to the next slide. We've broken this down into climate change in our food, so sort of that high level overview. Then we move into areas like land and soil, oceans and waterways. We also talk about wild foodways. So what about those foods that we love to eat that maybe don't come from a typical a food system or food source like the grocery store? What about those fiddleheads that we might forage for on a yearly basis? We talk about energy and transportation. We talk about food loss and food waste. We talk about what's on our plate, which is sometimes a tricky conversation, one that can bring up lots of emotion, because of course, when we talk about food, it's a very personal decision, what goes into our bodies. We talk about self and community provisioning, and we talk about ideas for action throughout this guide. And so it's a source of, again, covering some high-level statistics that we have found that live at the time that they were selected. And so one thing we want to note is when we have guides and information sources like these, particularly that were published 1 year and with a topic that changes so quickly, how long do those statistics, how long do they stay that true statistic? I think that would depend on many different things. And so we want to make sure that people are aware that this document is not static and it is not the end game, that again, it's an introduction and that we have space to be able to move forward and continue that learning. And so at the end of our Eater's Guide to Climate Action, you find that there's a long, long list of references Those are places that folks can go to continue the learning, to dig in a bit deeper. And, you know, at the moment, why don't we pause and see if we can find out where people's heads are at? So within the room, we've got another Mentimeter question for you. So it's the same link that is in the chat from before. If you can all go back in there. We'd love to know, where are folks' confidence levels at around the topic of food and climate change? And so when you go into your Mentimeter, just make sure to refresh. So we'll see where people are sort of feeling. We've got some going up and down, and this, as I understand it, is going to pull out a bit of an average for us. And so as people enter in their different answers, we'll see this moving across the line. And so we're about in the middle. Depending on where you're at, you may feel extremely comfortable, but maybe you feel like you've got no confidence at all as it relates to food and climate. And so this is the next piece of the conversation, is that, wow, there is so much information out there. There's so much to know, and it's impossible to know it all. And if you did learn it, then it may change. And so with an Eater's Guide to Climate Action, again, it is our starting point. I'll get Rosin to share her screen again. That local to global statistics, evidence-based statistics from a moment in time that are bound by the research that was done to pull together that information. And so continued learning is essential for continuing conversations around food and climate. And when we get into the facilitation booklet, we'll dig in a little bit more into some of those additional nuances and maybe what can be really scary about hosting conversations. I will get Rosin, if you can go back one slide. One other thing I want to note is that throughout the guide, what we want to encourage is that there are many solutions that exist that tie to food and climate change. An Eater's Guide to Climate Action showcases some. It showcases some different ways, but there are so many that exist. And so this is not intended to be a prescriptive guide. It's intended, again, to offer some insight, and that it's a base for learning more. So we've pulled out some of the pages or some of the details. We have pop-outs in an Eater's Guide to Climate Action that ask a question, did you know? And so this is an interesting piece to keep an eye out for as you go through. You'll find, did you know about high-level statistics, but you'll also find, did you know about some of the local and provincial initiatives, things that people are doing on the ground as it stands today, that you can look to pull into your food and climate work. We have a section near the end that talks about ideas for action. So that section pulls in a number of different ways. Is it getting in touch with a decision maker? Is it actually just reducing your own food waste at home? Is it taking time to reflect? Is it hosting a conversation in your own community about food and climate change? And so now we can pause for a moment. And Rosin, I'll get you just to go to your next slide, I think. And so here, where we are, we know that folks in the room are at maybe a mid to a little bit higher than mid-range of feeling comfortable talking about food and climate change. We have not dug into the details of the guide itself, but we thought maybe it would be interesting to ask folks to share in the chat box, what are some of the initiatives and actions that you know about that are happening across the province that are related to food and climate? So we're not going to do this one in Mentimeter. We'll invite you to share that in the chat. What are some of the actions that you know about, or local initiatives maybe happening in your own communities that are related to food and climate? And as those start to pour in, we'll start to read some of those off. An eater's guide being a living document, this is sort of a fun way to think about what are all the amazing food champions and folks that work maybe just a little bit in food. What are they all doing to bring forth food and climate change work? So we see community gardens and school gardens seem to be much more abundant. And Laura Myers, you are a bit of an expert in this one, that you've got some pretty great actions going on at the Hampton High School. But it's true, we see that a lot more schools are getting involved in community gardening and school gardening, creating food forests. I see Adam Birchweaver in the room with the Gaia Project. And so what a great example. Hayes Farm in Fredericton, New Brunswick, another example of regenerative growing practices that people are starting to learn in this urban space. Farmers markets, produce subscriptions, and community gardens. Kimberly, yes, all great things. And Carrie, it sounds like maybe more farm to fork movements are coming out. Karen, I am eager to know where you are with an outdoor garden and some hydroponics and trying to reach out to other schools. I have a sneaking suspicion that there might be some people in this room today that you could connect with. And people want to buy food from small farms rather than the grocery store, is what Laura is saying. It's so true. So thanks, Adam. Nakawick Middle School Food Forest, Oromocto High School Food Forest, St. Mary's, Elsie Booktook, Canterbury, Geary Elementary. I think these are all food forests that Mr. Adam Birchweaver in this room today has been involved with. And so just an FYI, if that's something that you're interested in, and I don't think he would be opposed to getting a message from you. And so we'll move on to the next slide and we'll start talking about this new tool that Food for All has just published, a facilitation booklet to pair with an Eater's Guide to Climate Action. So as we developed an Eater's Guide, we thought, how can we take this forward? How can we make this available for individuals to use in a different way? Conversations about food and climate change can be a bit divisive. They can be challenging. So can I ask everyone to use a reaction emoji just to indicate if you have had a challenging conversation about climate change? You see a couple of thumbs up here. It can be a real tough space to work within. And we know that some people also feel maybe I can't talk about climate change. I'm not an expert. And so while many experts do exist, not one person can know it all. And so we decided, how can we create a tool that will support that idea that we're not an expert maybe, but we can still enter into this space and we can still help enact change through conversation that maybe doesn't end in disagreement or maybe doesn't end in a real negative experience. And so the facilitation booklet really just aims to provide some tips from us as Food for All. Rosin, you can switch to the next slide. We've broken down the booklet into different sections. And so the first section within the guide, it really covers some self-reflective work, in fact. And so thinking through your own emotions about food and climate change, or about climate change as it is, can really help to support you in moving forward and hosting a conversation at home or in community to really understand, hey, what are my own assumptions here? And so we ask questions like, how do you feel about climate change? What motivates you to act and what deters you from acting? Understanding that for yourself can really support a generative conversation with others. We also want to think about what are the external factors that either help or hinder you from taking climate action generally and through food. And so thinking about our own physical access to food, whether or not we are nearby to a place that serves up or puts on offer sustainable foods, and whether or not that is financially flexible for us to be able to do that. Do we have that financial flexibility to purchase in that way? Maybe not. Then what's our own personal knowledge and experience about climate change and about food systems? So do we have the time and the interest and the ability to access information on that topic? When we think about the challenging discussions that can come up, the facilitation booklet is a tool to help support a conversation that is based in empathy and non-judgment, because we know that information is everywhere. And community members access information from many sources, including those that might not be so accurate, including those that perhaps don't cover the nuance or the context. And so it's really important to think through some of those ways of pulling together a group of folks to talk about a challenging subject when we get information from so many different areas. And so we also give some tips and some preparatory thinking around times that you may have been a part of a conversation where maybe you said something in a group that was taken the wrong way. Maybe it was criticized, and maybe that was done in a way that was hurtful or embarrassing, and how that can feel in conversation. It's really hard to know how we can move forward when when those things come up. It can be really challenging to sort of keep that energy and positivity and working together. And so an initial part of the guide is in that self-work, reflecting on how might you respond to a situation if that were to come up in a conversation you were facilitating. We also move into then planning. And so Food for All makes available physical copies of an Eater's Guide to Climate Action. Those can be ordered on our website. And so we have links to those sources. The facilitation booklet itself is available as a PDF electronically. It will also be available as a hard copy, as a smaller tool that you can have, that you can hold. And so we go through some of the planning and some of the ways of getting organized. And then we also work through some test sample agendas that you might consider. And we also provide some sample questions that you might use in your conversation. And so just as an Eater's Guide is not a prescriptive guide to responding to the climate crisis through food, that again, many ways exist, that is true as well with the facilitation booklet. It is not intended to be a prescription, but it is intended to help you feel equipped to develop something of your own, and to develop something based on what your community needs, and maybe what you need. And so perhaps you'd like to host a conversation specifically on food waste and food loss. And so we offer some ways to think through that and use the Eater's Guide as a tool alongside. And so with the facilitation booklet, we also will come back to the end to talk about some of the additional support tools that we have available. And I think for the moment, that's pretty much where we're at with our tool, that we want this to be something that you can pick up, work through, and say, okay, I'm ready to host this conversation. So I'm eager to move into questions from individuals in the room today. We'll go ahead and we'll make it possible for you to unmute yourselves if you would like to ask a question just by unmuting, or if you would like to ask a question in the chat box, please go ahead. No questions. I don't think I did that good a job of explaining. Oh, great. Laura, you've put your hand up. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Okay.
Hi, Laura.
I have students in the classroom too, so I just told them I'm going to ask a question, so you have to listen. I was wondering if Food for All ever comes to visit classes to talk about some of these things. Like I think I have an environmental science class and I'd love to show them this booklet, but it's always more effective when someone else talks. So I'm wondering if that's something that you've done before, is gone to classes and like walked through some of the activities or the ideas in that booklet? Is that something that Food for All would be willing to provide as a service to teachers who might not feel comfortable with teaching all that themselves?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. We have we've been receiving funding through the Environmental Trust Fund, Laura, for this work. We have not made any visits to any classrooms, and COVID it has played a big part in that. But what an amazing idea, and something that we can explore, certainly as an area of work, but also as an area that we seek some funding to do if that feels like that would be of interest to other teachers. One thing I would note is that perhaps, looking for a virtual event, if that's something that is of interest. So Laura, for you in particular, please reach out, please send us an email if that's something that you're interested in doing with your class before the end of 2022 or before the end of the 2022 school year. And maybe we can look at testing that out with your classroom. So you're saying you think teachers would love this opportunity. Yep. And maybe offered as a teacher education session. Thanks, Aisha, for that recommendation. Is there any other questions that folks want to pose? So either unmute or you can pop your question in the chat. Oh, and Adam, I clicked the ask to unmute button for you by mistake. But if you would like to unmute and ask a question, that would be great. Thinking. So if there are no further questions at this moment, we did see networking as an item that folks would like to get to, and you're in luck. We are looking to do some networking as well today. So we'll be organizing some breakout rooms. I see that some individuals have added an E for English or ENG, which is great. What we'll do in organizing the chat box or the breakout rooms rather is we'll organize it in a way that language can be respected. And so for anyone who has not put an English or noted a language preference in your name, or you can put that in the chat box perhaps, but easier if you rename yourself to note your preference, and then we'll move into some breakout rooms. Great, so thanks, Michelle. I see you've done that. Irina, Kimberly, we have yours, but Irina, Aisha, and Terry, if you can go ahead and rename yourselves. And what Rosin will do is she'll start to create some breakout rooms, and we'll have about 20 minutes. So we will do breakout rooms of 4 to 5 people. And how many folks do we have here? 1, 2, 3. We've got 13 people in here that'll move into rooms. And so Rosin, if we can do rooms of 3, I think that would be a good number. So 4 rooms of 3 and 1 of 4. So what will happen is once we open up our breakout rooms, you'll have a button pop up that you can select join. And here's the thing to discuss. First of all, of course, you probably want to meet one another. And so sharing your name and where you're located and perhaps what your role is. But then we thought perhaps folks in here might want to share with one another, what are some of the creative ways that you see yourselves using an Eater's Guide and the Facilitation Booklet in your own community? And of course, we're not taking notes on this. We're not going to police your conversation. So if you're thinking about other climate and food action in your room as well, let those conversations blossom and bloom. And so Rosin will likely have these rooms open up in a moment. And then we'll go into those rooms for about 20 minutes. When we come back, we'll do some sharing. So we'll see you all shortly. I will note that if there is anyone uncomfortable with being part of the recording, that you can feel free to shut off your camera. But please, if you're okay with that, go ahead and unmute and share back some of what came out of your discussion. What are some of the ways that taking action came up? Are folks ready to run with a tool like a facilitation booklet and an eater's guide to climate action? Laura, can you unmute yourself? Are you able to? Oh, you're not. Okay, I've asked you to unmute.
Now I can.
Okay. Thank you.
When I first did it, it didn't let me. So I'm going to have to be honest. Our group just spent a lot of time networking, which was awesome.
That's great.
Yeah. So I was in a room with Dana and Leola, and we just shared. So Leola was sharing, she's looking to find a way to get, community people involved in the school garden and trying to get some more champions involved in, because a lot of the grants that she's applying for, they specify that you have to have community involvement. In a small town, she's having trouble finding that community involvement. So we shared some ideas about grants and things. I learned that Dana can build anything. And I was interested in hydroponics, and both he and Leola have had experience with people. Well, Dana's built them himself, so he's going to share plants with us, and I just kind of share what's going on at our school. So it was great, but we didn't get to question number 2. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. That was your prerogative to decide which direction the conversation needed to go.
But
I think
personally,
everyone,
what I'd like to
Oh,
do with that, sorry to interrupt, is for the handbook, is I'd like to have copies to share with my students and have each of them take a section and explain it to the class and teach it to each other. And I think it would be a really great tool. It's wonderful. I've been looking through it.
that sounds like a great idea. Laura, thanks.
Can I just echo that, Jill? We were able to, I was in a room with Terry and Karen Vickers and her students and Kimberly. And it was just really enlightening to talk with these gals at the school to see their perspective as students and have them engaged. So I love the idea of having this resource available in our schools. And even just in conversation with Terry, understanding where our food comes from. And I love that visual in the group on page 19, I think it is like just shortening the food chain and understanding like your home garden all the way to the food delivery service. So how does New Brunswick act on those advocacy issues, and how can we kind of, educate and get to the root of how we, expand these. So it's great to see the young energy at the table, because we know we've all been working for this for so long. So hopefully there's something that comes from this.
Oh, that's wonderful, Carrie. Yeah, and there is so much within the guide. So some of those ideas, but then paired with, on that same page that we talk about the leakage from our economy, that when, we are not purchasing locally, what that looks like from an economic standpoint. So when we act for the betterment of the climate, we're also acting for the betterment of our communities in so many more ways than just environmental. It's social, it's economic, it's comprehensive. Who else would like to share? Anyone? In our group, with Marilyn and Gail, we did talk about some of the challenges of, Gail mentioned like wanting to take action, and not wanting to continue talking in some ways, like let's get something done, right? And so that is something that comes up so often. And in both of their areas, they're part of networks at the local level that, we also talked about the relationships at the community level and how important it is to be connected to your neighbors and to be connected to one another, so that collaboration moves at the speed of trust. And if you are in a relationship and you are familiar with the folks that you're wanting to connect and take action with, it's all that much easier. So certainly getting conversations rolling and coming together regularly is really important. Marilyn or Gail, would you like to add anything? Oh, Marilyn, you're unmuted now.
Yeah, unmuted. Yeah, in talking to Gail, I wanted to think of how to help. I was wondering if when young people start talking from the heart about climate change and what it means to them and their future, I wonder if Network would be open to that kind of community meeting where it doesn't maybe have to be even young people from there, but of course that would be the best, to talk from the heart about how they're worried and how it affects them and this kind of thing. I mean, in Sackville, we have people are still doing the Friday strikes, and continuing that, and they have their own group. So we hear from them quite often, and it's always powerful. But what Gail and I talked about were things that we were doing, specifically in our particular area, or what we couldn't do. Yeah.
Thanks, Marilyn. We have some more minutes here for some of this sharing, so I'd love to have some other input. Where are people at in their communities? What sorts of actions are they seeing that might be creative ways of moving climate action forward through food? Ooh, crickets. Oh, sorry, not crickets. There's a hand up over in Karen Vickers' classroom. Are you able to unmute? Hi.
Yes, I am. Hi. So something that we talked about where Marilyn was mentioning, like young students, like being able to like share how worried they are. I was just like, when we were in our group, I was with Terry and she was saying, like, kind of giving us some statistics that we had never heard before. So I think that when it comes to like young people in this kind of thing, I think you have to educate us first, because I didn't realize that I was as uneducated as I was. I think there's still a lot to learn before we can, like, we have to learn a lot before we can change a lot. And I think that that's something that should be focused on as well.
They had no idea, Jill, how much of our food we import here. They got a bit of a shock.
Yeah, and I would say that while we have some really base level statistics, so we know that about 8% of the vegetables on our plate are grown here, but that the majority of our food comes from a global grocery store. I would also say I still feel really in the dark as to what that looks like. And so knowing too that a lot of these things, we don't have the reports on them. And so where do they get measured? These are other ways that as community advocates and champions to get in touch with decision makers to find out a little bit more, because we know a little bit, but there's a lot to know. And so with it ever changing, some of the data doesn't even exist. And so I want to point that out too. But thanks for sharing that. That's a great insight. Laura.
Are there other teachers on the call? I wasn't sure if there are other teachers in this group, but you guys are students and you have a teacher, so you might want to mention it to them. Nutrients for Life offers an in-class session, and it's called Can One Slice of Apple Feed the World? And they come into your class and everyone gets an apple and a knife and they cut it and they talk about what percentage of the earth is farmland and talk about regenerative farming and things like that. And I had them come into my class and it was an excellent talk. So tell your teacher to contact Nutrients for Life and they'll do a presentation and it'll answer some of the questions you might have. But I love the fact that you guys have said that you have a lot to learn before you can change things, because a lot of people don't feel that way. I just want to get out there and make changes. But I like Jill said, knowledge is power, and you guys want it, which is awesome. Keep it up.
Yeah, and I think knowing that and maintaining that sort of sense is really important too, because things change so often. So we may know one thing today and maybe it changes tomorrow. And so being open to that possibility is really key too. Lifelong learners, am I right? We have a couple minutes left. Is there anyone else who wants to get their voice in? All right. And so with that, I think what we'll do is just move into the end of our event, our session today. So we have a couple more things to go through. So we know we've got a tool out there to help provide a base level understanding about food and climate change in New Brunswick. We know that it's got some base level statistics that will change, but that offers evidence base from research that we did lots of work to find and pull together. And within the Eater's Guide, for those folks hungry to learn more, there is a large reference section to continue that learning. And so the guide is there to act as that intro through all of those various themes. Now, second, we've talked about the facilitation booklet, a tool to help you bring this knowledge into your home, into your community, into your workplace, and start conversations or continue conversations about food and climate change very broadly, or about areas that might be specifically of interest to you. Food waste, perhaps, is an area of interest. Perhaps the idea of the emergency preparedness is a really important one in your mind, thinking about what happens if the borders close, or what happens in Maryland's situation in particular, being in that Tantramar area. It's a real concern about what happens if there is flooding that cuts off supply chain. And so the facilitation booklet is the guide to help you first determine how might I want to use this to organize a conversation in my own community, and then provides some of those additional supports to do so. And so we talked a little bit about the makeup of that facilitation booklet, but what we didn't share as much are some of the additional tools we've put in there. To make it simpler, we've added in a sample agenda, we've added in a sample survey, but Food for All also has a Zoom account. And we also use a number of tools on our end, like Doodle Poll, like Mentimeter, like now, as of today, like Mentimeter, that we would also love to make available to people interested in hosting conversations. And so as well, at the end of the booklet, you'll see there are some of those tools listed out and some of the things you might consider including, and Food for All can be available to support that. And so we're happy to lend out our Zoom account. We're happy to provide a little bit of intro training on Doodle or on whatever platform it is that if we can help, we will be there to help. And so the facilitation booklet, that will be printed in the next 10 days with physical copies. We'll have the PDF up on our website in the next couple of days. And we wanted to talk about one more tool available to our partners, the CFM program. And so the Community Food Mentors program, again, some of you in this room are community food mentors. The Community Food Mentors program is administered by Food for All. It's one of our core offerings. And as many of you may know, the CFM training is a series of sessions. It's delivered at community level, and it follows the CFM training syllabus, which covers topics like food security, food skills and knowledge, health, facilitation skills, starting community food actions, fundraising, and most recently, we have incorporated the food and climate change component into the CFM curriculum. And so you've heard correctly, we've added something new to this training curriculum, which means we have a CFM coordinator. Their name is Mina, and they have been going through an intense process of reviewing all of that content and refreshing it. The syllabus has been republished on our website. And so the CFM program, you can get straight to it by visiting cfmprogram.ca. And it's got lots of exciting changes. The rest of the materials will be uploaded soon as well. But while you're there, you can please browse our brand new CFM directory. The CFM directory is a place where graduate CFMs can sign up with a profile, a public profile, and then they are available to be contacted by folks in their community. And so you can get to know the work and the interests of some very skilled and dynamic CFMs in your own community. You can create your own profile if you are a CFM and you have not yet signed up in the directory. And so this is a new tool that we really want to make community food champions accessible to their neighbors, and for those folks to find ways to connect in and support maybe food and climate change actions, and maybe general building community through food. So we are very excited that food and climate is now an important part of the CFM training syllabus, because we do all have a role to play against the climate crisis, and the power of coalition building, of conversation, it should not be underestimated. And so we do hope today's session has helped in building some confidence in talking about food and climate with the people around you. There's a question from Laura. What an excellent question. So how do people become community food mentors? The structure of this program has been that of what's called like a snowflake model. And so Food for All prepares the curriculum and the content. We make that available in sort of a tidy package that community leaders can put their hands up and say, I'm ready to host a training like this. Community food action grants through the Department of Health, through public health, are a great source of funding that have actually been the source of funds for a number of community food mentor trainings over the years. And so at this moment, we've been dependent on community champions having the space and the energy and time to organize a training. But we are excited to share with you here only. Should we stop the recording? No, we can leave the recording. We are planning and exploring how might we host the first ever virtual community food mentor training through Food for All this coming fall. And so we'll be sure to share that information out in our newsletters. So stay connected to that if you are interested in becoming a CFM. And so with that, we actually are at the end of the recorded portion of our event today.